You have captured my heart, my treasure, my bride. You hold it hostage with one glance in your eyes. Your love delights me, my treasure, my bride. Your love is better than wine. Your scent more fragrant than spices. Your lips are so sweet, like nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. You are my private garden, my treasure, my bride. A secluded spring hidden in the fountains. Now I want you to listen to how she replies to that. Awake, north wind, rise up, south wind, blow on my garden and spread its fragrance all around. Come into my garden, my love, and taste its finest fruits. I'm telling you guys, this Bible thing is pretty good, huh? Get it? So that's Solomon 4, and if you go on and you read in Solomon 7, is that mine? Yeah, I got a beard, so things start to get a little scratchy. But my wife, she's the one that encouraged me to get the beard because she thinks it's sexy. So I'm all in for it. Solomon 7, in chapter 7, he continues to serenade his love. And when she feels wooed and loved enough, she comes out and she says, I am my lover, and his desire is for me. But men, do you desire your wife? Or do you lust after her? See, I've seen this throughout the weekend, and I feel like there's a theme. Each year that we come here, each time, it seems as the teachings go on, there's a theme that gets presented. And I feel like, as we've gone through this, like we don't get together and put our heads together and say, hey, this is what I'm talking about this. Now the Spirit comes in us and it tells us what we need to speak. And this weekend, lust, the spirit of lust is heavy here. And it's not just in first-time attendees. And these servers, I'm telling you, lust is heavy. And we've got to break that. So do you desire your wife? Or do you lust for her? C.S. Lewis writes, lust is a poor, weak, and whispering thing, compared with the richness and energy of desire, which will arise only when lust has been killed. A few years ago, I was forced to analyze every aspect of my life. See, my relationship with my wife had come to a point where she wanted a divorce. So I had to look at everything, and I found that in the area of sex, beauty, and intimacy, and there was a huge gaping hole. I didn't view my wife anymore as this amazingly beautiful woman, but instead, I lusted for her. She had become an object of my appetite. And see, the most discouraging part of this is I let lust come into other aspects of my life, and it really destroyed it to the point where it left me feeling angry, bitter, and resentful to her. You see, guys, I felt entitled to sex with her. She was a stay-at-home mom at the time, and I was bringing home the money, right? I was a good dad. I hung out with the kids enough, right? See, I felt like I deserved sex. I felt like I was obligated to get it. I felt like I deserved her body. But man, I was a fool for that. And I soon learned just how much of a fool I was, because when she told me that she wanted a divorce, man, the separation, it happened almost immediately. And what did it do? It left me angry. It left me bitter, questioning what was going on. But more than anything, it left me feeling alone. But for some reason, I still lusted after her. I mean, guys, this is how stupid and dumb I was. I thought that if she just came home and we made love to each other, and held each other afterwards, then all was going to be good, right? And that's how it feels. It's what it looks like in the movies. But I was foolish about sex. You see, being foolish about sex is destructive and it's violent. And I was the biggest fool of them all. See, sex wasn't the only thing that had gotten in the way of our marriage. There were so many others, but sex truly left a gaping hole, a wound that needed miraculous healing. After my wife left, I was left alone. And God had finally come into me. Like, He had finally come to a point where after I put myself on my knees in front of him, that was the only thing that I could do to get to a point where I could realize the sin and the hurt and the wounds that were in my life so that I could present myself to him in a way where he would then come into me. And when I finally decided to give all of me to him, he was right there ready to give all of himself to me. I mean, he began showing me things in my heart and my mind, things that I didn't even realize. And he did it fast. You know, some people say it's like drinking from a water hose. With me, it was like he shoved my hand under water and I was trying to gulp my way out. About a month into our separation, I started reading this book. It's called Love in the War. It's by John and Stacey Eldridge. And I'm going through it, and that's when the Spirit of God, he finally showed me just how broken my sexuality was. So in this it says, so how do you recover the sexuality of Eden? It begins by offering strength and beauty outside of the bedroom. The way you live and love in the everyday clears the path to your sexual power. It prepares your heart and heals your love for another so that you find yourself craving your spouse. I mean, I had an appetite for my wife, right? But it was more like a vampire craves virgin blood. So let me give you another example for this. You know how like one day out of nowhere you get a craving for something like your favorite food? And so you make plans, right? You're either going to make it at home or you're going to go out to a restaurant. But as soon as you indulge yourself in that, the craving goes away. And that's like lust. But the craving that Eldridge is talking about is like soul-inspired. There's a desire there that can only be defined as this richness that God gives us. It's this beautiful craving for your wife, and here I am craving her like a piece of meat. So in this point of where we're at, I mean, she's gone, and so I start thinking, God, how do I desire my wife? How do I kill that lust? I'm praying to God. I'm praying to God about it. So God starts talking to me. He starts talking to me about her, his beautiful creation. So first he takes me to Ephesians 2:10, where Paul calls us his workmanship, his masterpiece. And he says to me, Brandon, think of how amazing and joyful it was the day that I sent you into the world. Think about what it felt for me to get to see you enjoying my creation. Think about her, the day I blessed her to this world. Your Eve, my daughter. So how do you see Eve, Brandon? How do you see your wife? How do you treat Eve? How do you desire Eve? Why do you belittle her, resent her, angry with her? Why is it that you treat her worse sometimes than your enemies? And God, all right, God, I got you. I'm treating her poorly. Okay, she's Eve. She's a wonderful. And he said, no, let me take you further into this. Then he takes me to Genesis 2:18, and he says, it is not good for man to be alone. I will send him a helper fit for him. All right, God, cool. Wife's a helper? Cool, I love it. Yeah. He said, no, not so fast, Brandon. He said, look at that word, helper. So in Hebrew, that helper word is ezer. And it does mean helper, but if you look in the Old Testament, it appears 21 times. 2 times it describes Eve. 3 times it's when Israel is crying out to God for help when they're being besieged. And 16 times it describes God as our help to the helpless, our fortress. He said, now how do you see Eve? Yeah, she's described the same way. He said, I want to take it one step further for you, Brandon. See, I made Adam from dust, but for Eve, I had to take a little more surgical approach. So I made Adam fall asleep, and I removed one of his ribs. Now, Brandon, do you see the symbolism here? You're kind of a smart guy. And I said, okay, God, tell me. He said, the ribs protect your most vital organs, the lungs that breathe in the literal breath of God. And the heart, that if I removed all the ribs, just a small hit to the heart could stop you dead in your tracks. So I took a rib out of you, Eve, the fortress, the protector of your heart. All right, God, I'm getting it. See, God wasn't done, because in the midst of this chaos, a few months later, by the grace of God, when God told my wife that when she was going through this trauma, before she told me she wanted a divorce, she came and she prayed to him, God, I don't know what to do. And she heard God say, daughter, it's okay if you divorce him. I will still love you. And I hear what most of you men are saying to that, but 4 months later, when she said, God, I can finalize this divorce, he said, wait. She's so faithful, I'm telling you, man. So after that, we started dating again. And this, I knew that sex was off the table. Straight up knew it. I had to become a safe place to her. A place that she felt that she could open up to me. A place that she felt like she could ask me anything, and I had to just take it. And it's hard. You want to fight back, but you can't. So again, I knew sex was off the table, so I had to meet her somewhere else. And if you remember in this book, it said that it begins with how you live and how you love that prepares our heart and love for intimacy. And I was being prepared. Because you see, intimacy is like a three-legged stool. It's spiritual, sexual, and it's emotional. Men, we put sexual right there at the top. And then comes spiritual, and last it's emotional. But women, they're emotional, spiritual, and physical. Because most of the time, sometimes you got a woman that, woo! But that's typically how it is. But God says that if it's like this, it's not in balance. And for our marriages to be whole, it has to be balanced. So, how do we get it balanced? We have to look at how God has designed it. And one has to be God first, right? Spiritual intimacy has to be first. The second one is physical and emotional, and they're on the same level. Because God designed men and women different, but we're equal. So in this time, I know that I've got to meet her somewhere. And it starts with being emotionally intimate with her. Sexual intimacy is something that we come across and we think we're pretty good at it. But the Bible says that sex, in Genesis, when Adam and Eve make love, that he says that Adam came to know Eve. He didn't say that they had sex together. No, he says he came to know her. And if we look again at the Hebrew word for that, if you travel down to David in Psalm 139, he says, search me, God, and know me. They're the same word. Is our intimacy with our wives the same way? Is it that beautiful? So to catch up there, I had to meet her again in that emotional place. So I'm still terrible at this. But what I found God telling me is this, and I want y'all to, I've got 3 points here, and I think these are really, really important. But number one, you've got to prioritize her. You've got to find time to talk to her, be there for her, listen. You've got to just be there for the family. So that means turning off our phones, putting work behind us, turning off the TV, and being present for her. But most importantly, we have to invite her into every aspect of our lives. She wants to be there in the trenches with us as our helper, as our Ezer. She wants to be there, supporting us, going through it with us. She wants to be there in every aspect of our lives. Men, they want to know us deeply. And we talked about going back and confessing things, but gosh, man, they want to know everything about us, and they want us to know everything about them. Number two, you have to ask her what she's needing. You see, before we separated, I would come home from work, and if I saw she was in a bad mood, I would go into fix-it mode, right? That's what men do, we fix it. It doesn't work, right? If I see the dishes there and she's in a bad mood and I do it, I think I'm taking a burden off of her. And the reality of it is that's not what she wanted, so it left me angry and resentful, like, why don't you see the cool stuff that I'm doing for you? God, give me sex. No. But the reality of it is, like, no, it didn't work. What she needed was for me to see her and meet her where she was, to be present, which meant I had to ask her what you're needing. Sometimes it meant doing the dishes, giving the kids bath, cooking dinner, but most of the time it meant sitting there and listening to her, being present with her, listening to her day, her stresses, what happened on the phone with her mom, the conversations, everything. And she didn't want advice, so don't just give it to her. Ask her what she needs. Honey, do you want me to give you advice here? No. Shut up. Cool. That's what she needed. And the third thing was, stop expecting sex. Right? So what if I did the dishes? So what if I helped with the kids? What if I mowed the lawns? What if I took the trash out? Odds are those are things I should be doing anyway. And if she's nagging you about it, it's because you need to get off your lazy butt and help. Just the truth. Those romantic dinners, those romantic evenings, the baths, the sensual massages, they don't have to end in sex. Because the most intimate times I've had with my wife through this, I learned that it was the emotional times when I just sit there in her presence and we talk. The scent of her would be so alluring, but it didn't have to end in sex. Because when we take our wives' voices out of sex, then they don't get the God-designed pleasure that God gifted to them. In her book, The Great Sex Rescue, Sheila Gregor, she surveyed 20,000 Christian women. And 40% of them said that when they got married, that they were told that they were obligated to give their man sex whenever they asked. When the surveyed husbands heard this, their first reaction was, seriously? I want my intimacy with her to be a shared gift. I love my wife, and I don't want her to feel, I mean, that's men. That's something you got to go home and talk to your wives about. You've got to ask her, do you feel obligated? And it hurts me to know that my wife felt obligated. And if that's the message she's getting, think about the message your daughters are getting and how she's going to take that into her marriage one day. The last point on this is, man, I've heard men say that they have a point system with sex, like brownie points, like, if I do this many things, my wife will give me sex. And that's the relationship that they have. But men, this is more like a transactional approach to sex that resembles prostitution more than it does God's design for sex. You see, God tells us that our sexual intimacy is a covenant that He describes as becoming one flesh. But it isn't just sexual, it's all-encompassing of how our marriage should look. Becoming one flesh means the uniting of two whole and separate people into a new, God-designed and God-purposed life, where two people's hearts and souls become so intertwined that they are like one. If you've accepted Christ, and you've told Him, I want you to be center of everything. If your wife has done the same thing, then she's already made that commitment. But have you done that with your marriage? Have you sat there with God and given Him, submitted Him your marriage? If you haven't done that, then it's something that you need to go home and do with her. You need to pray that with her. And if you don't know where to start with that, at the end of this, we're going to have a little prayer on the screen, and it'll be up there through the reflection. It's something easy that you can write down and you can take home with her. Man, I know our intimacy and our sexuality is being punished daily. And we let it infiltrate our minds so that our desires are destructive. Instead of foolishness leads to sexual destruction, right? got to be smarter than that. God says he wants to give us the knowledge, so let's take it. Our marriages should resemble the relationship that we have with God. I mean, that's why God gives it. He wants that to be a picture on earth of the love that we have for him. We've got to take it back, and it starts first by putting God in the center and getting to a place of balance between sexual and emotional intimacy. And I'd like to pray with y'all real quick. Oh, Heavenly Father, I am so thankful that you made sex pleasurable. I am thankful, Lord, that you gave it to us as a gift where we can intimately feel the love that you've given us. And we get to share that with our wives because, Lord, there's nothing more sanctifying feeling than in the intimacy and love that we have with our wives, God. And we thank you for that. And there are men struggling with intimacy and sexuality, and I pray, Lord, that you come into that. I pray, God, that you heal the wounds of sex prior to marriage. I pray that if there's anyone that is bringing that into, those wounds into their marriage, that you, God, Lord, that they put it on the cross. Is nailed on there today. For this is a place where our wives and us should be connected. And you want that. You want to be there with us in that, Lord. Where we come to you for healing, we ask that our spirits be whole with our wives in one flesh. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, man.
So, little recap of where we're at in the book here. We're going to be talking tonight about doubt. And in doubt, we're going to be talking about doubting Thomas, we like to call him. But before we get to that point, we kind of need to understand where we're at in the history of the Bible here. So prior to this event, the disciples have been with Jesus. They've gone through the communion with him, and to the point where they've gone out into the garden. And in the garden here is where we're about to see Jesus be betrayed. So Judas comes to him. He gives him a kiss. This alerts the guards there that this is the one that calls himself the Son of God. So here, Judas comes up, gives him on a kiss, and if you like violence and you like gory movies, you got it right here, because Peter comes up and he cuts off a guard's ear. And Jesus, in his miraculous way, picks it up and decides to go, sticks it back on it and says, "Ah!" And the ear goes back together. And then he looks at Peter and he's like, "No, that's not what we came here for." And at this point, there's fear that gets placed into the disciples, and they flee. So most people don't realize, they think that Jesus, the disciples are there with Jesus throughout most of the story. But in fact, Jesus goes out pretty much by himself and is arrested. He goes through all these trials, goes through the beatings, goes through all the crucifixion and so forth alone, because the disciples here have become afraid and now they've fled. But you can imagine at this point, right? You can imagine being one of the disciples who's devoted your last 3 years of your life, right? You devoted your life to this man that you call Jesus. You call literally, God is with us. Imagine the fear that's going through your mind. Imagine the anxiety. Imagine the doubt. The doubt that you spent 3 years with this man, and is it really true? Is it true that he was the Messiah that you thought it was, that you thought he was? So he's dead. Now Jesus has been crucified. He's on the cross. He's been placed inside of a tomb. So his physical body, his blood, flesh, bone, all of that has been placed inside a tomb. And now we start getting into the story here. So on the third day, after he'd been placed in a tomb, a few of the female followers of Jesus, they go in and they're headed to the tomb to anoint him with oil, bring spices, and so forth. But when they get there, they notice that this large stone has been rolled away from in front of the tomb. At this point, I mean, if you're like me, I would be sitting here kind of freaked out, right? Freaked out because here's the stone. If you imagine, like, that screen right there is the entrance to the tomb. And now all of a sudden you've got a large boulder that covers the entirety of that. So it's not like someone can just go in there and roll it away with a little heave and a hoe. I mean, you've got to have some oomph behind, and you've probably got to have, what? Got to have a bunch of people. I mean, this cat right here, he's pretty big. He knows that you got to have a couple of different people to go with it. So when they get there, though, they're amazed not to find anybody. But when they walk inside, they see an angel. And this angel says, hey, the person that you're looking for, Jesus, as you call him, he's not here. But I want you to go tell the disciples that he's risen. And the ladies are pretty much, they're kind of freaked out at this point, right? They're afraid. So afraid at this point that instead of going and telling the other disciples like they were told to do, that Jesus has risen, they just keep their mouth shut and they don't go tell them. So afraid that they now doubt themselves in this moment. So the next person, Jesus, I'm sure, is looking down upon them. He's like, come on, guys. Like, seriously, why don't you go tell them that I'm still alive? But instead, Jesus says, well, I'm going to make another appearance. So he comes to Mary Magdalene, and he shows up for her. And immediately when he shows up for her, she is like stunned. It's Jesus. She's so excited that she can't keep it to herself, that she runs to the disciples and she tells them, I've seen the risen Jesus. What he told us he would do, he is here. He's alive. He told us that he would be alive, and it's actually happened. The disciples, being the numbskull, stubborn men that they are, doubt Mary Magdalene. So, what happens next? So the next time Jesus appears to two of the disciples. So now he appears to two disciples. They're all like headspace, mind blown. They go out and they run to Jesus, or run to the other disciples like, hey, you can't believe it. Mary Magdalene was right. Jesus has risen. And what do? They doubt again. So now we're doubting like 3 times. We got 3 times to doubt. So Jesus decides at this point, he's like, you know what? This isn't working. I've got to show it to the disciples. So now we pick up the story, and Jesus comes in front of all the disciples, and he shows himself, except Thomas. Thomas is the one that is not there with him. So let's pick up here in John chapter 20, verse 24 through 29. So follow along with me if you don't mind. Now Thomas, one of the 12 called the twin, was not with them, was not with Jesus, or when Jesus came the first time. So the other disciples then told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see his hands and the nail marks, and literally place my fingers inside these marks, and place my hand into his side, I will not believe. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, and put your hand and place it into my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Thomas answered him, my Lord, my God. Jesus said to him then, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So what I really love about this is that Jesus comes to Thomas, and he doesn't wait for Thomas to say, let me see your hands, and let me see your wrists, let me see your sides. Jesus knew exactly what Thomas needed in that moment, and Jesus gives it to Thomas, even to the point, though, that Jesus knew Thomas even better than himself. Because if we look at the passage there, at no point does Thomas say, hey, let me put my fingers inside your hands, or let me stick my hand around you to the side. No, Jesus just says, hey, look, take a look, dude. And Thomas, I can imagine, falls at his feet and says, my Lord, my God. And at that point, they've all, the disciples, all the women that were with him, all these people have now seen the risen Lord. And I imagine at this point, they just fall at their feet and they start worshiping him. Because at this point, they see that Jesus is alive, literally alive. That Jesus that said he would be alive, that is alive today, just as he much is forever. So you would think at this point, though, that Thomas's doubt, that it would disqualify him That Jesus would have said, hey, you've missed it 4 times. That because you've missed it 4 times, I'm going to kick you out of being one of the disciples. But no, Jesus says no. I knew that you needed this. I knew that you needed to see me. And it didn't just disqualify me. It didn't disqualify. Instead, it was Jesus who kept pursuing after him. The thing is about that too, it doesn't disqualify us. In fact, doubt is something that all of us we all have in common. You may not want to admit it, but it is something that kind of binds us together. So even though Thomas verbally said, I need to see his hands and feet, I need to stick my fingers literally inside him or around his side, the other disciples, I believe, actually had the same doubt. Because if we go back a little bit into the passages, it's actually when Jesus shows himself to the other 10 disciples before Thomas was with them, the first thing Jesus says is, peace be with you. And the second thing he does is he shows them his hands and his side. So when we think Thomas is the doubter here, we have to look at all of them and say we all have something in common, right? They all had something in common. They all doubted in the same way. Jesus knew exactly what they all needed. The same doubt that Thomas was facing, the same burden, the same thing that plagued him was the same thing that plagued all of them. And the same thing can be true for us too, because if we don't talk about our doubt, then it's something that we think is just our own, right? We think it's the same thing. We think that, hey, I'm the only one that wonders why there's so much evidence of UFOs out there. Like, God, please explain this. Like, Lord, help me, please, because I've missed the mark on this one. Like, I'm the only one that thinks that. I mean, just tonight, like, I literally am sitting in the car driving here, and I doubt, should I even be coming here, because I wonder, am I a good enough parent to my children to think that I'm worthy enough to come and talk to y'all? And the enemy likes to feed those doubts more and more with us. And in that, some of you probably have the same doubt. There's probably sin in your lives that you've done outside the building that makes you wonder, should I even come into the building tonight? That doubt is what keeps us from really receiving all that Jesus has in store for us. If there's 2 things that you take away from tonight more than anything, just think of this. That doubt is a normal thing. We all encounter it. And doubt does not disqualify you, nor does it stop you from receiving Jesus and all the grace that comes with it. So 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfect in weakness, right? His power, Jesus' power, is perfect in our doubt. Those areas that we are weak, those areas of doubt, those are areas that Jesus makes his presence known. That becomes a strength in him. Like for me, I have a couple. I just told you a little bit of a story of doubt. One thing, when I was your age, I was a part of a youth group that was 200 people strong. We had 200 people there every single week, to the point where we had a 7th and 8th grade service that had 200 people, and then we had a 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade that had 200 people. A massive youth group. And I was a part of that, and I was one of the leaders as a 7th and 8th grader. I was part of the youth, the band there, and everything. And then my family up and moved to a town called Decatur, Texas, which was a lot smaller. So I got uprooted from the support system that I had and placed into a place where I didn't know anybody. I wasn't involved with the church. My parents weren't involved in asking me, and hey, you should go to church on Wednesday night. You should go, you should go, you should go. Instead, I got involved with a wrong group of people, and doubt started creeping in. I started questioning a lot of things. And honestly, I think questioning and going through those phases is a good thing. But it's a good thing to the point to say, why do I believe what I believe? But at the same time, if we let it take root and overcome even our faith at that point, it can start to overcome even the strongest of our faith. And that's what it did to me. I mean, where I still believed and I still didn't lose my faith, but it was something that, even though I didn't lose my faith, I got wrested into things that I wouldn't have done before, like premarital sex or alcoholism. I wasn't alcoholic, but alcohol, and even to the point of like trying marijuana and things like that. All of those things, I do not believe I would have done had I stayed still in the larger youth group or that youth group that I was vested in Doesn't matter how large or how small, that's that youth group. And then going to a place where I wasn't encouraged and wasn't invested in them. That to say, God still helped me understand and bring doubt into the question and understand why I believe what I believe. The second was the time that I joined the Army. It was one of those things where I didn't have to join the Army. I was on the verge of graduating my associate degree, and I decided, you know what, I could go to broadcast journalism school in the Army. And instead of doing that, they were like, you should go to language school. And I was like, righto. And to the point of I was going to put my life on hold to go into the Army, except there was one drawback. The drawback was they didn't want me to ship out until January. Well, at this point, it's like June, July, and I was like, well, if I have to ship out then, I'll just start school in August. So I'm praying about it and said, Lord, if it's your will, I'll start school. Like, I'll go to your school here, and then I'll push the Army away. Or if you want me to go into the Army, you'll move up my ship time. Well, sure enough, in August, I get a call that says, hey, you can ship out in September if you want to. And I'm like, yes, all right, Lord, I hear you. This is what we're doing. And then 5 weeks later in there, I had a freak accident where I re-broke the same ankle that I had 2 screws in. So here I am, going to the hospital there. They take x-rays. I start seeing one of the medics there, one of the doctors, and they're like, hey, man, with your file, you're not even supposed to be here. So here I am thinking, God, you placed me into this. You brought me here. And now within 5 weeks, where are you? I questioned a lot of that. And then it took another 4 weeks to me to get processed out. And that's a whole nother long story about the U.S. government just dragging their feet. And so the point of that is I had 2 instances in my life where I questioned, God, what are you truly trying to do here? What are you trying, where are you? Especially in the Army. But I will say this, when I got out of the Army, it's one of those instances in my life that I look back and go, I learned more about myself in that. Because every single night that I was laid up questioning God, I was still going into my Bible and I was reading. I had other people that I was sitting there praying with and so forth. And we were going through it together because I had brought those doubts out in the open to other people. See, our doubts, they can be good. They can be good in a sense of because we all have them. And it's a way that Jesus calls us nearer to him. But then at the same time, they can be very, very dangerous. See, I look at doubt and faith as like seeds. And if I were to take a seed and a bunch of flowers and I plant them into a garden, I tend them, right? I go out and I tend them, I water them, I give them the best fertilizer that they have. And as they sprout, I then go out there daily and I start looking and viewing this beautiful garden that's in front of me. And I get to marvel in it. But the moment that I wait a couple of days and I just pass by it, I get in a hurry, there's a little seed that starts popping up, and that's a weed of doubt. And then doubt pops up, and I miss it. A few more days goes by, a week goes by, and before I know it, all these weeds have now taken over my garden. They've taken over the flowers. They've overcome that. So this beautiful thing that I had once seen has now been overcome by these weeds. But all it took was for me to literally pay attention long enough to see that first weed that popped up and start picking it so that others could not come in. It's like doubt's the same way. If we let that doubt come in, then ultimately it's like a weed that can take over our faith. I mean, I just gave the story of my life, right? I gave the story of how when I was in high school, how I let the weeds of doubt take over. And I knew that premarital sex was bad. I knew that drinking alcohol and smoking weed, I knew those things were not the things that I wanted to do. I knew that they weren't holy. I knew that they weren't godly, but it was something that I decided that it didn't matter. It didn't matter to me. Sorry, guys. There's notebooks. You have notes too at school, don't you? Yeah. So God wants us to express our doubts to him, right? He wants us to pray to him and tell him what our doubts are. It's like that pruning of the weed. But we also need to bring our questions and our doubts to those who can help us understand them. Because again, if we hold it down and we don't have someone that can, UFO story is probably a bad one. But I can ask God, where are you in this moment in my life? And if I'm bringing that to, let's say, Jared, I'm like, Jared, I'm going through this struggle. There's a doubt that I'm doubting, where is God in this? Jared is someone that can sit there and help me understand maybe what is God trying to teach me in this moment. And that's always something important to remember, is when we're going through phases of hardship in our lives, is to take a moment and step back and say, Lord, what are you trying to teach me here? But a youth pastor is a great person to bring that to, a small group leader, a trusted friend, a parent, someone that you can bring that doubt out into the open. When we engage others with our doubts, they begin to lessen. The power of these doubts begin to lessen. It's like when Thomas expressed his doubts to the other disciples, they could take on that burden with him. The other disciples didn't have to come out and say what theirs were because, hey, they're like, hey, Thomas has the same doubts. We're all good in that. But the same thing can be true with y'all. Like, I don't know what some of your doubts are, but you know what your doubts are. And I guarantee you that there's others in this room that are sitting there at times where I've said, maybe the other atheists at school, maybe they have something, maybe they're right on this. Like, that is a doubt that starts to creep in that can really take a foothold and steer us down a big, long path of destruction. But I tell you again, you're not alone in this. Like, your doubt does not disqualify you. And one thing that I learned when I was going through a recent phase of doubt, like, there was something that I have a guy that I watch and I listen to. He's a Christian pastor, professor, writer. And I was listening to something that he said, and it threw me into a loop because he was talking about his own personal doubt. And I'm thinking, like, man, if this cat, if he has doubt, then odds are that I'm not alone in this. But one thing he said that is if you're writing notes, write this one down, is that when you have doubt start to creep in, go to the areas of faith that are the strongest. So saying, like, man, I'm doubting, like, what's going, Lord, how can, I don't quite understand creation story sometimes. I believe in you and I believe this, but then God says, well, look at all these other things that I've done in life. Look at these other places that I've fulfilled my promises in. Like, that's an area that I can go and grasp onto to not keep feeding that doubt or let it take over. The same is true, but same thing at that, you still have to take that doubt and you need to bring it to a pastor. You need to bring it to someone that can help you get through it. Again, doubt does not disqualify you. I want you to understand that doubt is not something that disqualifies you from Jesus. If it was, again, Thomas would have been super disqualified right off the bat, right? I would have been disqualified. Jared would have been disqualified. All the pastors here, every person in this world would have been disqualified from entering the kingdom of heaven. But each one of us has some kind of doubt at some point in time. You're not alone in that. But admitting your doubt to Jesus and to others is what really frees us from that burden of carrying that weight of that doubt. And we don't want to admit it, right? We don't want to admit that we have doubt because it makes us feel like our faith is imperfect. Like Jared, it makes me feel like there's something wrong with me when I say, man, I doubt being up here. I don't want to admit that I felt like unworthy coming up here. But the truth is that there's probably something that Jared had come up today or last Wednesday or another Wednesday before that made him feel the same way. And when we can communicate this, that means that together that we can come together and actually sit there and go, okay, why am I feeling this way? What is it that I need to maybe do in my own personal life, or in that raise my hand and say, I'm never going to be worthy enough. I am never going to be worthy enough, but I'm blessed that I get to sit here with y'all. Sit here and talk with y'all. We let the weeds of doubt grow, and when they do, they begin to take us out of the beautiful life that Jesus has in store for us. In the last verse there, in verse 29, I'm remiss if we don't speak to it. Jesus tells Thomas, after he's shown him his hand, and Thomas has fallen on his knees in front of us, he says, because you have seen me, you believe. It's a question of Thomas. I'm sure Thomas at this point is saying, yeah, I believe. But the gut punch to Thomas and the rest of the disciples after that is the words that Jesus says, blessed are they who did not see and yet believe. And all of these people got to walk with Jesus. They got to hear the parables. They got to hear him speak. They got to literally watch him do life and do life with them. To take on the biography of Jesus and the things that they said, hey, that what we should be doing in our life, they got to literally live that with him. And yet Jesus says, blessed are those who believe and did not see. And that's us. There's so much beauty. There's so much grace in it. And yet I guarantee you that there are people in this room right now that have doubt, so much doubt, that they don't believe that they're worthy or are disqualified from entering into a relationship with Jesus. Like you want to believe in Jesus. You want to. But you're scared of those doubts. Like God knows every hair on our head. He knows every good deed, every bad deed that we've done. He knows exactly what you're thinking right now. He knows that He knows the doubts you have. And just like Thomas, He keeps showing up for you. For you that don't believe, He's still showing up for you. And for you that do, man, it's awesome that He keeps showing up for us. He keeps giving us mercy and grace day after day. So yeah, doubt's hard. And it's something that we face so often. You're not disqualified. In fact, you are loved. And His grace is enough for all of us. Y'all pray with me? Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you for this time that we get to come together, God. I thank you for the worship music, blasting of that, Lord, just getting to shout out, Lord, that the Lion of Judah like roars, and we get to roar with you, Lord. Lord, I thank you for each and every one of these young people that are here, these friends that are here with us, Lord, these brothers and sisters in Christ, God. Lord, I pray that your words, Lord, they pierce where they need to be piercing. They challenge where they need to be challenging, Lord. But Lord, to know that your love and grace covers all. Lord, I pray that if there's anyone in here that's struggling with any kind of doubt, and even if it sounds silly, Lord, that they come to one of us, one of the leaders, one of the pastors, before they leave tonight, and they just ask a question. Or if there's any questioning that they have, or any answers that they need answered, Lord, I pray that they just bring it to us, Lord. As they start meeting in the small groups here in England, Lord, I pray that you just bring great discussion, Lord, conversations that, Lord, help uplift them. God, I just thank you for each and every one of the blessings that they are. Thank you for letting them be here tonight, God. We ask for your protection as they go home, whether it's with their parents driving up, with a friend's parent, or themselves, Lord. It's in your Son's heavenly name we pray. In Jesus Christ.